Hey, Gianmarc here to talk about something very near and dear to my heart, and that is vibrato. When I started out playing guitar, I was super bluesy. All I wanted to play all day was the blues. So consequently, I think I developed a pretty solid vibrato because with blues, your vibrato is just so important, and really it's important with all styles of playing. In fact, when I hear a metal player that's just flying through arpeggios and fast alternate pick things, and then they slow down for a second and start playing some quarter notes, half notes, whatever, where they have to show a little vibrato, and it's bad. It's just the worst thing ever. And a lot of people that they'll criticize for saying, oh, that guy plays with no feeling or whatever, and he's fast but no feeling. A lot of times they have crappy vibratos. A lot of other times that it's their note choices where they're not playing with feeling, and it just sounds like they're doing exercises. But vibrato is also a big part of it, because if you're playing the right notes but with the wrong feel, that can be almost as detrimental as playing the wrong notes. For example, if you're playing this real mellow passage, and your vibrato sounds like this. That didn't sound mellow. Whereas if you were to do it more like, so much more subtle vibrato there. You have to make it fit the feeling of the song. So it's really important that you develop good control of your vibrato once you have a vibrato. You should be able to do it fast, slow, wide, narrow. You should be able to do any combination of those different traits for your vibrato. So, all right, why don't we get down to the technique of it a little bit. So basically what's going on is that it should come from the wrist, not the finger. So basically vibrato is like a small bend, that kind of, it undulates or oscillates, whatever you want to call it. Like that. And this bend needs to come from the wrist. You can do vibrato from your finger like this, where I'm just kind of wiggling my finger. But yeah, those are usually the people with the shaky, inconsistent vibratos that you hear it and you're like, yuck. The consistent, nice vibratos, it comes from the wrist. So essentially, you fret the note with your finger, and your finger is kind of sitting on the string almost like a hook shape, like that, and then your wrist just turns. So that's how the vibrato comes from the wrist. It's from a turning of the wrist. So your wrist is kind of twisting. And it can either twist down or it can twist up, like that. So it's either up or down. But the twist, typically, if you're on the top four strings, so E, A, D, G, you typically want to twist down. But the B string, probably not, unless you're going to do it pretty narrow. And the high E string, definitely not, because this happens. It'll just twist right off the side of the neck. So you definitely don't want to twist downward on the high E string. But so yeah, essentially it's just this twist of the wrist, and particularly for the downward vibrato, you can kind of rest like this part of your knuckle on the side of the neck, and then that acts as like a fulcrum for a lever, right? Like a fulcrum, like on a seesaw, the middle part that the seesaw is sitting on, like that's the fulcrum. So essentially that's what's going on here. It's this part of your hand sits here like a fulcrum, and then that kind of gives you some leverage as you twist. And that works as well for upwards. You don't really get, it's not really as much as using as a fulcrum, but it does rest comfortably on the neck for an upward vibrato. So let's see here, what else can we talk? Oh, the other important thing is the tension in the string. So you don't want the tension to be, but essentially is if we're gonna if we establish 0 as just the string being fretted normally. So that's zero tension from your hand. Obviously the string has tension on itself, but we'll establish that as 0. So if this is 0, and then you add some tension. So, you know, if you were to graph that, you know, it's like, you know, 0, up to tension, down to 0, up to tension, down to 0, up to tension, down to 0, like that. What you don't want to do is to, you know, bring it down to 0 and then past 0 and then put tension the other direction. Otherwise, you know, you get this kind of, it's kind of makes you seasick. It just sounds really bad. So when you do your vibrato, it's one direction or the other. It's either, you know, you're up and down to 0 or down down and up to 0. So you're either twisting it down or twisting it up with your wrist. So that's the mechanics of it. So now you know how to bend it properly. The other thing too is you want to use, like when you're pulling down, you want to kind of use the weight of your hand. You almost want your hand to feel like it's almost bouncing on the string a little bit. So you want to use the weight of your hand. And just like when you're bending up, you kind of use the weight of the neck itself. Don't think of like the guitar neck as like the stationary object, and you know my hand must move around the neck. You know, like the neck is it's part of the game. So and your hand, you know, it's all. So you want to use your weight. You don't want to think like, you know, up 0, up 0, up 0, as much as, you know, you just kind of let it bounce almost. So a good way to develop that, you know, that oscillating pattern for your hand is to bend it. Start off doing it really slow, like maybe do a quarter step bend, and just do this. So just start doing that, and then eventually, you know, let your hand relax a little more, and just let it pick up frequency. And eventually you just kind of get a feel for it. But yeah, you just start out slow doing it, and you should be fine. Oh, another thing, if you're combining a bend with vibrato, which is a really nice option, because you can get a really nice natural sounding vibrato, like vocal vibrato. As it undulates, it kind of goes above and below the pitch. You know, so the target pitch is here, and the vibrato is going on both sides of it. And when you're bending up to a note, you can accomplish that. So the big thing with bending up to a note and then adding vibrato is that typically you want to try and get a few fingers behind the fret where the note is that you want to bend up. So say the G on the 12th fret here on the G string. So I was bending up to the F. So basically having those two fingers behind my ring finger gives additional support. One thing I'm not sure I mentioned is another reason why your vibrato really has to come from the wrist is that if it comes from the fingers, then it's inconsistent depending on which finger you're on. Whereas if it's coming from your wrist, your finger's just holding the spot, and then your wrist is doing the work. So, you know, then you can fret with any finger you want and not have to think, oh, you know, I can't play this note with my pinky because, you know, my vibrato is going to sound all weak, and, you know. But if it's coming from your wrist, you know, that was a whole step bend with my pinky with vibrato because it was coming from my wrist, and it really didn't matter that it was my pinky. The other thing, too, is with your pinky, I had my other three fingers behind my pinky supporting that note. So, you know, you can have 3 or 4 fingers bending that note, and as long as your vibrato is coming from your wrist, it's not going to feel awkward at all. So that's another reason why the wrist is really important for vibrato. But yeah, so if you're going to do the whole step bend and then throw, or a half step bend, and then throw vibrato on it, you can actually let the pitch come a little bit below and a little bit sharp of the pitch of your target pitch, and then, you know, you get more of a natural vocal type vibrato. But I think that's about all the time for today. But yeah, don't forget to check out my album Too Proud to Beg, and I'm working on an EP of covers too. Alright, I'll see you next time.